In our ongoing study of Sarah Palin's politics and public record, a theme is emerging that is not a good theme. The more we find out about Palin, the more it seems we have to worry about. For example, her advisors. A lot of familiar faces, it turns out, familiar from the Bush administration. The Washington Post, noting the big names on the campaign roster, said today, quote, "Far from being a group of outsiders to the Republican Party power structure, it is now run largely by skilled operatives who learned their crafts in successive Bush campaigns and various jobs across the Bush government over the past 8 years. Now, instead of worrying about a third Bush term, we have to worry about the second one just continuing without any real interruption in leadership." And then there's Alaska's first dude, Todd Palin. We already knew that for almost 7 years he belonged to a political party that advocates seceding from the United States. But we're just now learning the degree to which he is involved in his wife's administration. He's not just your average snow machine racer, oil worker, fisherman dad. An Alaska Democrat tells the Post that the first dude is also Governor Palin's, quote, de facto chief of staff. So in a Palin vice presidency, we could expect a lot of input from an unelected former secessionist? But nowhere is the principle of the more we know, the worse it gets more true than in the Troopergate investigation, where tonight we have more evidence and more denials that make the evidence sound mild in comparison. The question at hand is whether Sarah Palin fired Public Safety Commissioner Walt Monaghan because he refused to fire State Trooper Mike Wooten. He was involved in a nasty divorce with Palin's sister. In her own defense, Palin has claimed to have fired Monaghan because he went on an unauthorized lobbying trip to Washington to request federal funding for a program to fight sexual violence. Now even that bizarre denial seems to be falling apart. ABC unearthed this travel authorization for Walt Monaghan's trip to D.C. The authorization is signed by Governor Palin's chief of staff. So much for the whole unauthorized thing. The latest Palin explanation, by way of McCain campaign spokesman Taylor Griffin, is that the travel was approved as a matter of routine. That's your defense? Joining us now, Lyda Green, the Alaska State Senate president, who is a Republican. She represents Wasilla. She knows Governor Palin well. Senator Green, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Good evening.
It seems as though the excuse for firing Walter Monaghan as public safety commissioner has gotten less and less credible as it has evolved. The latest explanation is that she fired Chief Monaghan for trying to get funding for a program to fight sex crimes. Can you shed any light on what actually happened and what the explanation is?
Well, you know, the interesting thing about any governor firing an at-will employee is you can fire them for no reason, but you should need to be very careful that the reason you use is credible, is the real reason, and is what's at hand. And Walt Monaghan's been a good servant, great commissioner, and all of our commissioners head to D.C. for trips with our congressional delegation.
The worry here is that, and this is a cliche, but the worry is that the cover-up is worse than the crime. She could have said that she fired him for any reason. The reports of why she fired him do not seem to be credible, particularly this unauthorized trip allegation. There have been generic allegations that Governor Palin is secretive and that she values loyalty from people around her to a degree that may be detrimental to her ability to govern. Can you shed any light on that?
Well, it was my observation that she is very resolute in where she's headed, and differences and any show of disagreement on policy dissolves into, for her, a disagreement on personality, and it becomes personal very quickly. And that's been my observation, and the thing that's really bothered me most of all.
You're a very powerful Republican in Alaska state politics. You are the president of the Alaska State Senate. You represent Wasilla, which is Sarah Palin's hometown. What have been your areas of policy disagreement with Sarah Palin? Are there big issues on which you two disagree that might explain why you've had a relationship of the type that you've had? Or is it a personal dispute? What's happened between the two of you?
No. Well, following 12 and a half years of a very amicable relationship, we were associates and allies in the political world, and as her campaign was taking off in the primary, I chose to stay neutral. And I did not get into the primary because I was working with a seated Republican governor. And I think, in retrospect, I've been told by some of her supporters that that was a mistake on my part. On policy issues, I found that the continuing campaign rhetoric that was carried into the administration having to do with people being ethically challenged and the corruption issues were vastly overstated. And then when she went into the two things that I think are probably the hallmark of hers one was the Alaska Gasline Inducement Act, which essentially awarded a $500 million assistance to the TransCanada to build the pipeline. However, nothing in the contract says the pipeline will be built. And the other was the very, very gross increase in taxes on the industry that supports Alaska by about 85%.
Senator Green, one other question about something that may be hard to get a grasp on from outside Alaska, but you probably know well, and that's the issue of Todd Palin. We have heard scattershot reports of him doing essentially what seems like state business from the governor's office while she is away, him being involved in policy discussions, him making very detailed having a very detailed consultative role in deciding items to veto and things. What's your experience with Todd Palin? And if Governor Palin is elected vice president, should we expect him to be a very powerful unelected member of the government?
Yeah, I was very surprised to see Todd in the governor's office one time when I approached the office to have a meeting with the governor. Once I walked in, I assumed he would leave. He did not leave. He did not enter the conversation, but he was across the room, and I felt it was different from any meeting I'd ever been in. I've had other legislators tell me that they had the same experience, and I do think that the governor listens to her husband, Todd, and they probably discuss to a greater extent than some of us might the goings-on in her office.
I don't think people are worried about husband and wife consultation. I think they're worried that he might be making policy. No. But we may have to worry about that on our own.
That's right.
Alaska State Senate President Lyda Green, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.